There's a four-letter word in the English language to which it seems the majority of right-wing religious conservatives have a very strong aversion, almost a phobia. To hear them speak, you'd think that this word had no place in polite conversation. It certainly has no place in theirs. But I don't really hold much with taboos. I think it's always good to talk about these things. So today, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, let's talk about that concept. That word that the right-wing, Bible-thumping types find so troubling. Today's word for discussion has 4 letters and begins with F. The word is fact. This is originally intended to be a response to a video entitled Planned Parenthood Exposed by Live Action, and that particular video appeared on the channel A World Exposure, fronted by Larry Murphy, who, like his beloved Fox News, seems to be of a mind that facts should never get in the way of a good story or an opportunity to demonise the opposition. In his video, he refers to an exposé put together by someone called Lila Rose. And I put a link in the description box to an article in The Guardian that provides a somewhat different view of Ms. Rose's noble character. First off, he proclaims his difficulty in understanding why an organisation would be called Planned Parenthood when its intent is, in his words, to stop parenthood for the ones who are seeking their services. Well, Larry, that's what the planned bit in the title is all about. It's allowing people to control when and if they become parents, rather than forcing them to let it happen. It's actually enabling people to control their lives and plan their families, to make sure that when or if they decide to have children, they're ready for that to happen. And a child that's born to parents who want it and feel that they're ready for it is surely much better off than a child that's born of, rape or a now regretted teenage fumble. Larry argues that there should be no federal funding for Planned Parenthood after the amount of corruption exposed over the past few years. And he then goes on to reference videos made by the pro-life group called Live Action. And so we come to that nasty little F word again. Because when you start looking at the facts surrounding the videos made by Live Action, you get a very different picture from the one that they'd like to represent. Actors are sent to Planned Parenthood, often pretending to be in dire personal circumstances, and the response from the Planned Parenthood staff is then edited in such a way as to misrepresent what was actually discussed. And not just biased editing, but outright lies. One example being that when one of the actors claimed to be a pimp running a sex trafficking operation, Live Action claimed that Planned Parenthood did not contact the authorities. In fact, and there's that nasty little word again, they did contact the FBI, and before the Live Action video was released. But unsurprisingly, this didn't stop Live Action from claiming otherwise. We're then treated to a discourse on how Planned Parenthood obviously doesn't care about the health and well-being of women because A, they respect a woman's privacy by not reporting rape to the police, and B, they offer support to underage girls who find themselves pregnant and visit without their parents. His argument doesn't take into account any considerations as to why a rape victim wouldn't want to report a rape, or why an underage girl is there without her parents. Then we're treated to taped calls where Planned Parenthood employees are calling emergency services following complications arising from an abortion. Larry opines that Planned Parenthood employees are more concerned about the visibility of an ambulance arriving than the welfare or convenience of their patient. It seems that, in his view, humanitarian giant that he is, a woman who has just undergone an emotionally and physically traumatic surgical procedure, which has subsequently encountered potentially life-threatening complications, should run the gauntlet of protesters carrying banners and shouting abuse and spitting on her, all whilst being bundled into the back of an ambulance in severe emotional and physical distress. He then rounds off with more references to the lovely Lila Rose and denunciation of abortion, concluding with a disingenuous soundbite suggesting that he and his anti-abortion buddies are the ones who really have the interests of women at heart. Now, if you look at the names the opposing sides in the abortion debate take for themselves, I think it reveals an awful lot. The pro-life brigade are not pro-life at all. They don't care at all about the welfare of the woman who is pregnant, of the people who are seeking contraceptive advice. What they claim to care about is a piece of tissue that may, at some point, if the pregnancy comes to term, become a human being. They care so deeply about the welfare of that child that most of them would deny it a decent state-funded education, would deny it financial support from the government to prevent it from living in poverty, would deny it state-funded health care, and would support its murder by the state if it's found guilty of certain crimes. They're only pro-life whilst in utero, and after that you're on your own, and it's dog-eat-dog. The pro-choice lobby are just that, pro-choice, giving people access to contraception and maybe an abortion should it be required. Pro-choice is about discussing a woman's options if she's considering terminating her pregnancy. And this is never an easy decision. I doubt there are many women out there who would undergo an abortion lightly. There are clear risks, as there are with any surgical procedure. And there are psychological implications too. To portray an abortion clinic as a place that allows women to walk in off the street for a termination with as little concern as if she was in to have her nails done is dishonest and cruel. What I find most horrifying about the people who proclaim to be pro-life is the disgust that they exhibit when considering the sexuality of women. The lovely Lila has claimed that she would like to see abortions performed in a public square. Larry seems to think that women who've been raped or abused have no right to privacy, that if they choose not to go to the police, then someone should do that for them, regardless of the potential consequences for them. The very idea that women should have control over their lives, especially reproductive control, seems to disgust them. Perhaps if these bitches were all back home chained to the stove and serving their menfolk, they feel everything would be right with the world. Instead of teaching people about sex and how to manage their reproduction through contraception, instead of giving pregnant women who don't want to be pregnant the opportunity to control their own lives, they prefer to make that decision for them, quite happily ignoring all the evidence that shows them they're wrong. The evidence that when an abortion is illegal, you don't have calm, medically trained members of staff calling for the emergency services to take a patient to a hospital with better facilities for treating them. You have young women committing suicide, or bleeding to death, or dying from blood poisoning following botched backstreet abortions, unable or unwilling to go to the authorities for fear of prosecution. We have people like Sarah Palin championing abstinence-only program, whilst ignoring the evidence before our very eyes as to just how well that worked out for her own family. We have politicians saying that state-funded abortion should only be available to victims of forcible rape, whatever that is. I mean, forcible rape. Does that mean that if you're not held at knife point it doesn't count as rape? It's like saying that having your pocket picked isn't theft because, well, you weren't mugged or threatened with a weapon. I'm all in favour of people having a variety of opinions. That's what stimulates discussion, and I think it helps people come to make an informed decision. But when I see people unable to acknowledge the very facts before their eyes, when I hear people claiming that women who are bleeding to death following complications arising from a surgical procedure should be paraded in front of baying protesters, or forced to have their uterus scraped in front of a hostile crowd like a public execution, when presented with this kind of almost pathological hatred of women, then I'm afraid that I can only come to a conclusion there's something seriously wrong with these people.